Story 1. Had a fun class, and there was one joker kid who was asking questions about stuff that was coming up in the next chapter. I answered his question, telling him to keep it in mind for the next chapter. A week or two later, we get to that chapter. He mentions that he knows it, so I think it would be funny if he taught it using my slides while I sat in his chair and pretended to be a student. The kids thought it was great. He did pretty well, too. When he made a mistake, I'd pretend to ask a question with the correction built in. Everyone had a great time and seemed to learn a lot. Next week, the kid's parents come in and accuse me of picking on him and trying to embarrass him. At no point did they think to ask him if he had been embarrassed. They had tried to make an appointment with my principal to throw me under the bus without even talking to me. Luckily, he was awesome and just told them to go talk to me. Just goes to show you don't know what your students are telling their parents, and even if it's the truth, how parents are interpreting it. I feel bad for the kid because he and I got along so great before that incident. But I wouldn't think of kidding around with him after that. That sounds like such an awesome way to handle that. In my limited experiences, the best way to learn is to teach. I bet that kid knows that chapter really well. Shaking things up for the class probably did a ton to wake people up and get them involved as well. Story 2. I once had a student hit me. I reported the student and they were suspended. Mom was adamant that I had made the whole thing up, even though it was witnessed and there was photographic documentation of the mark it left. The next year, that student's sibling was in my class. Mom had them removed after she found out because this teacher has a clear vendetta against my children. The sibling was really upset and tried to say that I was always nice and helpful, but Mom would not listen. She thought I was just lulling the sibling into a false sense of security before striking. I've been screamed at by parents, but for some reason, this experience was far, far worse for me. Story 3. I teach at university, so my interaction with parents is very slight, but on a couple of occasions I've had angry parents calling my office, wanting to talk about why their kid isn't doing well in my class. I'm required to tell them that I'm legally not allowed to confirm or deny any student's enrollment in my class, or discuss any student's progress in my class with anyone but the student, which ruffles a lot of parental feathers. On one occasion, I'd said my spiel to a parent and gotten the usual, "Well, I pay their tuition, it's my money, so it's my right," in return, and had replied with, "If you'd like to set up a proxy, you'll need to go to the registrar for a form which your son can fill out and sign, and that will allow me to talk to you." The parent totally lost their temper at that and yelled at me, "He won't effing sign it!" followed by a stream of verbal abuse and obscenities, mostly speculating on my parentage and educational attainment. Gosh, I just have no clue why your kid doesn't want to talk to you about his grades. PSA: if you are a college student, please be aware that your parents are not legally entitled to information about you, even if they pay your tuition. If you are a parent of a college student, please be aware that your kid is considered an adult by their institution. And professors aren't just being obstructionist jerks when they won't and can't give you information. Story 4. I got caught off guard during a conference with the parents of two students. I didn't expect it to go south because both students were doing fairly well, but it did. One parent was absolutely furious that her daughter wasn't doing as well as her son. Furious with me, that is. I was obviously giving him more support than her daughter. Of course, I couldn't get her to give me any specifics about what it was she wanted me to do differently. She just wanted to lie to me about my ability to do my job. Probably the most frustrating part of being a teacher is being blamed for things that you have no control over. Students get a B instead of an A? You obviously taught the material poorly. Story 5. At a parent-teacher conference, I had a mother say that her daughter was worthless unless she learned English better, because her daughter wasn't pretty enough to amount to anything in life. The daughter was there and needed to translate for her mother several times. The mom spoke passable English, enough to say most things. The daughter only translated a couple words here and there, but still, her English was better than her mom's. Story 6. My mom is a teacher, and her worst was at an open house type thing. The two parents of a kid were getting a divorce, and apparently it was pretty rough. Both decided to go to the event that night. Well, they got into a fight about something, and it heated up, to the point where the wife started getting physical. My mom couldn't stop them, so they had to call the police. Our elementary schools don't really have conferences because there's typically no need to. So they just have a night where all the parents can show up and the teacher tries to talk to all of them. So 25 plus 8-year-olds were watching two parents get into a physical fight. Story 7. Students whose parents work in the building, teachers, custodians, assistants, cafeteria workers, etc., are the worst. If the kid is an asshole and you tell their parents, you have to continue to work with that parent long after the kid is gone. I had a student in middle school who was late to my class every day with a pass from his mom. I ended up having to go to the principal and have him take care of it. Story 8. I had this asshole of a kid when I taught 8th grade. No matter what I called home about, his mom would make excuses and yell at me. Kid is talking? I need better classroom management. Kid is picking on others? Well, they probably bullied him first because of his weight, and what was I going to do to punish them? One day, he calls me over and tells me he needs to go change his pants because his D is so big it was like a man's. His quote, and his pants were too tight and painful. He then grabs it through his pants to show me the outline. I had to report him for harassment, and there was an investigation. He got removed from my class. His mom told the school that I was never allowed to speak to her son again, and that the whole situation was my fault because I looked too young to be teaching 8th graders. Story 9. During my 1 year as a teacher, I called a parent because he was kicking other students during class. Her response? Not my little angel. I was then notified I'd be attending a conference with this parent and the principal. She called me a racist and demanded I be fired. The principal had my back, but only in private after the parent left. The mom must have told her son what she said, because I was greeted the next day by my almost entirely black orchestra defending my honor. Story 10. I work at an international school. For the most part, the students are fairly well behaved. Like anywhere else, however, there are exceptions. There was one student, let's call him Bob. Bob was a very difficult student in numerous ways. He was disruptive, lazy, and rude. I had him in 3 different courses the same year. Near the end of the last one, I was helping him after school with an assignment. The thing was, Bob actually had some ability in math, and had managed to write enough correct answers when I woke him up during tests. So he still had a chance to pass this particular course. The assignment in question was long overdue. It was more than an hour after class had ended, on a Friday, I believe, and I was just generally tired of Bob's antics and lack of effort the whole year. When I'm helping him with a problem, he turns to me and says, "Do you ever just feel like a total failure because you're a teacher? Like a huge failure? I want to aim so much higher than that." I took a few seconds to collect myself. Bear in mind that this student was over 20 years old and was failing a grade 10 applied math class. When I was his age, I was wrapping up an honors degree. The tuition his parents were paying to keep him in school was more than my university tuition. It took all of my patience and self-control to calmly explain that I didn't feel like a failure, that I enjoyed my job, and that, if he wanted to aim much higher, he might have to put in a little more effort than he currently was at some point. That is my worst so far. Bob has since dropped out. Story 11. This isn't the scariest or the most serious example, but this one dad pissed me off pretty badly one time. He came to drop off his 2 daughters, and then asked me to speak to one of my fellow instructors, who we shall call Sarah. We have a pretty standard policy of not offering up staff to irate parents until that staff member is given a heads up and agrees to speak with them. I gave him the standard, "Sarah isn't here right now, but can I help you with something?" And Dad proceeds to explain how his 6-year-old was forced to go outside during a thunderstorm the day before to look for a ring Miss Sarah had lost. He said all the other girls in his daughter's class were forced to spend a long time outside while it was raining looking for the teacher's ring, and his daughter had come home covered in mud. I thought this was strange and didn't seem like something Sarah would do. If anything, I imagined she would have just looked for her ring herself. I told him we would discuss it as a staff and take the appropriate action. When I talked to Sarah about the incident, she was incredulous. It hadn't been raining very heavily the day before, and Sarah and another staff had all the little kids after lunchtime, normally when they would go outside and play. Sarah found a plastic pool toy shaped like a ring, went outside to our playground and hid it. and then told the girls that they could choose between staying inside and playing board games or joining her outside on a quest to find the magical ring that had been tragically lost. Most kids opted for the epic quest, and while it had been kind of muddy, the kids had a ball. They still bring it up every once in a while. I guess this particular girl either didn't really get what was going on, or she got in trouble for being muddy and threw Miss Sarah under the bus. My guess is the latter. Story 12. Not a teacher, but I've been coaching for 2 years, and I had a parent ask me to come early one day to talk about their kid. I thought there was a health issue or something, so I agreed. Turned out the parent was furious that their kid wasn't allowed to compete at real meets even though they had only been diving for a few months. And it takes about 2 years to really get everything down to be able to compete. She wanted me to let her kid go to regionals the next week, a meet you have to qualify for, when her child only knew how to do 2 dives, and you needed 11 to go. Suffice to say, at the end of the session, she pulled her kid out of diving to find a sport with a more immediate payoff. Story 13. I once had a girl in my elective class who was struggling with her mathematics. She wasn't going to college for anything math-related, and wasn't performing very well. Worst in the class. I first told her that she may want to consider taking a different class during her junior year while she still could. That way, she could return to this class as a senior if she felt inclined to do so. As the brain matures, the ability to understand mathematics increases. Her parents went nuts, basically taking it like I was saying her daughter was too stupid to take the class. I had emails from them telling me they were going to get me fired. They called and emailed the principal to try to make it happen. I had a 99% approval rating from all students, the highest in the school. They were the 1%. These were helicopter parents. Their kids got away with everything. The daughter didn't take advantage of it much. She was a sweetheart. But their son sure did. He knew he could do whatever he wanted, and if the school tried to stop him, he'd just cry foul and his parents would support him. He died driving too fast around a corner. I blame the parents. Story 14. I had this student who was diagnosed with a couple mental issues, but which in no way affected his academic abilities. He was also gifted and talented, and attended extra courses because of this. This kid had almost every adult he had ever met wrapped around his finger. I vowed not to be one of them. Basically, he was a jerk. He would pull all kinds of crap, like not doing his homework, playing games on his school-issued iPad during class, not responding and ignoring teachers and other adults when spoken to, lying, manipulation of kids and adults. Basically a piece of work. His parents always took his side. They never thought it was possible that their child could have any fault. So, whenever he was written up, sent to the office, they would email or call that evening to complain. By the time he got to my classroom, this had been going on for years. The administration had all but given up because the parents were that exhausting. I was writing this kid up nearly once a week all year. If it were any other kid, he would have probably been suspended multiple times and possibly removed from the school. But because the parents were such huge pains, the school couldn't do any more. So he essentially got away with murder. It was extremely exhausting and frustrating, but I never stopped. I refused to back down on this kid or his parents, even after the principals had all but told me nothing was going to happen. This kid is going nowhere fast, and it pisses me off to know that it's almost entirely his parents' fault. Story 15. Obligatory not a teacher, but happened to one of the teachers I was close to. My music teacher senior year was the sweetest person ever. I graduated, but we're still close and talk regularly. There was a guy in my class who only took the class on the idea that he could use guitar as his instrument, which would have been completely fine, except he couldn't read the sheet music and failed almost every playing test because of it. My teacher called his mom to explain why he was getting such a bad mark in the class, after constant harassment for contact throughout the year. And the woman just tore her apart and was extremely rude and disrespectful to my teacher, even though she had several valid reasons for failing him in the class. Examples like failed playing in theory tests, constantly talking out of turn, being disruptive, etc. I came in on my lunch because we were getting ready for our spring concert that night and had some last-minute stuff to do with several of my friends and my teacher. I walked into the music room, and my poor teacher was in tears. I felt so bad for her. The shitty part about it is that the kid's mom teaches kindergarten at my old grade school, has for years, and is still one of the nastiest people I've met. Story 16. One of my teachers, who was probably older than the Queen of England, had been teaching for like 300 years before she had our class. She was a true relic. She also loved stories about awful parents and how they've changed over the years. She really liked the story of one of her earlier years, when a father insisted on bringing a child with him to the conference. And every time she said something negative, the father turned to his son with a look of pure vitriol, and the son looked up at him with wide eyes. She says the son was doing fairly well in the class and showed no signs of harm or abuse, but that the father had a look so terrifying that she herself was scared, and she went on to give the kid positive reviews after that, just because it frightened her so much. She met the father a few years later when she went to a florist, and it turned out he's a florist and a very happy-go-lucky guy. I think the story she says is the worst were the parents who came in and were blaming the school system for everything wrong with their child. At this time, she was a more storied teacher, so she could handle them better as they yelled at her for ruining their sweet little angel, and how they would have to take matters into their own hands later that night. She informed the principal, and she's not 100% sure what happened, but apparently those parents were abusive, and the child was removed from their home. She got teary as she told this to us, and pleaded with us to tell her if there was anything wrong at home. She also had some funny stories. My personal favorite is one from the early 80s, when a set of parents came into the meeting wearing fairly revealing swimsuits, and apologizing, saying they forgot to bring a change of clothes. The dad was wearing basically just spandex, shades, and a pick in his huge fro. They were apparently very courteous, and their daughter was a very good student. But it shocked her that parents would come to a meeting like that. She had loads of funny stories. Story 17. I had one 5-year-old who was a pain in everyone's ass. He would get a little goofy, rampage, fall still, and get tired. He never remembered all the crap he would pull each rampage, so we couldn't really help him correct his behavior. This happened 7 to 10 times every day. And then one of the teachers put 2 and 2 together. He was having seizures. His rampages were his body preparing his brain for the impending episode. We let his mom know about this by telling her this is what we noticed and we think it's important that he gets checked right away. She insisted it was evil spirits and pulled her son out of school. She taught 4th grade at the local elementary. We were a small private preschool. Education laws are weird, and because teachers are not doctors, we cannot diagnose and then report neglect if the parent does not follow up. We are only allowed to document what we see and approach the topic with the parent. If the parent does nothing or believes even obvious medical problems are caused by spirits, we are required by law to respect their decision. All we can do is hope to cover our own ass with a file on the child, and hope future teachers find similar issues and tell the parent about the problem enough to convince them to seek medical help. If his issues get worse and his mom tries to come after us about never noticing, we have a clear paper trail to say we tried to help.
Story 1. Not taking the time to explain themselves on certain topics. The whole do as I say because I said so or because I had you is not effective. Rules should always have valid rationales behind them, ones that you can explain fully. Your room must be clean. Building habits and routines makes life way easier, and keeping a clean house can help reduce the chance of injury from tripping or pests. Bedtime is 8. Sleep is very important for our health. If we don't get enough, we get cranky and won't function as well. Yada yada. Adjust for age. And you can build in safe phrases for times when your kids need to listen and follow directions without question. These are used like this. If I ever grab your arm and say apples are oranges, you need to do as I say, because it's a matter of your own safety. Once we are safe, I will explain. Story 2. Not letting them learn how to mourn. On a grander scale, there's this idea of not letting your children suffer. We all know it's important to let them struggle a little to learn how to cope, but what no one ever talks about is allowing your children to mourn a loss. If a beloved toy breaks, go buy a replacement ASAP. If a pet fish dies, go buy a replacement ASAP. You're teaching the kid to just replace things they've lost instead of processing that loss. So what happens when they lose something that can't be replaced? They don't know what to do or how to handle it. Like, let your kid cry over their dead fish for a few days and bury it in the garden with some flowers before asking if they'd like another. People think it's small. Oh, it's just a toy. But losing a beloved toy is likely the closest thing a kid has to losing a person or a pet they've had for years, like a dog. Let them learn to mourn their lost teddy bears so they'll build those processes. And when older, can mourn the family dog. Story 3. Forgetting what it was like to be that age, and expecting their kids to react differently to things than they did when they were that age. Drove me nuts when my mom did that. She'd scream, "Act your age," at the top of her lungs, and in my head, I'd be like, I'm 12. If I acted my age, we would both be screaming right now. You act your age. Story 4. Bullying their own kids and then telling them they need to toughen up and grow a thicker skin when the kid gets upset. Like, whatever happened to just treating your kids with respect and kindness so they in turn would treat others with respect and kindness? Also, completely disrespecting their kids' boundaries when they say no. If you don't listen when your kid is telling you no, why would your kid think that anyone else is going to listen to them when they say no? I think your own parents being your biggest bully growing up is a topic that seriously needs more research. And I don't mean just the obviously abusive kind. I mean the subtle bullying, constantly telling your kids they can do better, so why aren't they getting better grades? The constant bringing up embarrassing shit that happened when they're kids. The pranks that make your kid embarrassed and uncomfortable, and then telling them they can't take a joke. Forcing your kids into situations where they're clearly uncomfortable and doing nothing to make them feel better or secure. Story 5. They fail at letting their kids fail and figuring out how to recover. It prevents the kids from becoming resilient. My son once procrastinated until a major project was due the next day, and he hadn't even started it. I helped for a bit, then went to bed. Left him to it, thinking it would teach him a lesson. Well, it did. Just not the one I wanted. Little got an A, and then gloated about how great he was for getting it done last minute. Said the other kids were losers for wasting time. He was 9. I'm still mad at that teacher. The project was crap. Story 6. Thinking kids owe their parents shit for providing food, shelter, etc. Wanting kids to be thankful is one thing for sure, but a lot of parents think the basic necessities are something they have to be thankful for all their life no matter what. It's hurtful for both parties. Kids didn't ask to be born. It's a lifelong commitment for the parents. Talk to your kids, provide, and don't thank your messiahs for doing things you're supposed to do as a parent. My mom told me way too often, "I gave up so much for you." I really feel like a problem 80% of the time, and if I don't people please, I feel physically sick. Setting boundaries is so hard for me even at 30 with 5 years of constant therapy. Don't do that to your kids. No contact guaranteed. Story 7. Not apologizing when they're wrong. I've never heard my mom apologize to me, ever. She has said so many hurtful things to me in the past that I've never let go of because she never came to apologize for any of the things she said. If she had simply apologized and admitted that what she said was wrong and hurtful, I think that things between us would be so much better. Story 8. Might sound a little contradictory, but either not disciplining them or disciplining them way too much. I always think of that episode of The Simpsons where they show Ned Flanders as a child growing up. His parents were so messed up. We've tried nothing and we're all out of ideas. It really says something about his parents when Ned of all people, hates them. There was an episode where Homer was trying to press Ned to find out anything he dislikes, anything at all, and it was so hard for him to figure it out until the end of the episode where Ned reveals that the only thing he hates are his parents. Or another episode where Homer was hanging out with Ned's parents and the usually calm Ned punched him in the face. Story 9. Forgetting that a kid's brain isn't fully developed like their own. Also, shaming in any way of something your kid is into. Trying to learn about it is actually quite helpful and a good way to connect. And parents can learn things they like too. I had no idea I liked Pierce the Veil until my 12-year-old liked them, and I wanted to check them out. This is something I'm constantly reminding my dad about. No, your 3-year-old grandson isn't acting unusual because he's throwing a tantrum when he doesn't get what he wants. Kids do that. They're still learning. They don't deal with their emotions the way adults do. Story 10. Try to fill every minute with organized activities such as traveling sports leagues. Don't get me wrong, some extracurricular activities are good, but when your kids never have an unaccounted for minute, I think it has a negative impact. I'm a preschool teacher, and student burnout is very real. Although my students are young, some of them go from school to dance, gymnastics, sports practice immediately after school, and then repeat the whole thing the next day. I had a student tell me that she was so exhausted from constantly moving from one activity to the next that she just wanted a break. The parents were overscheduling her to the max, and it was starting to heavily impact her behavior and attention span at school. Story 11. Not discussing money with them. I'm not saying parents should dump their financial stress on their kids, but things like budgeting, taxes, and personal finance discussions would have helped me tremendously. I heard a father talking to his small daughter, between 6 to 8 years old, about budgeting. We were in a bookstore, and she wanted to buy a book. He told her that she could buy any book she wanted, but that she had to keep in mind how much money she was allowed during their vacation. He went through the math with her. He discussed possibilities of other purchases later on during their trip. He continuously reminded her that it was her money and she could use it however she liked, but to remember how much total money she had. He was so patient, gentle, and real with her. It was an awesome learning experience for me, especially since I have a baby. My mom always said that we didn't have enough money. She would hoard it in a sock and is just stingy all around. Definitely want to break that cycle with my child. Story 12. Forcing them to interact with their adult friends, then ridiculing them for not wanting to socialize with rando adults, and then humiliating them by bringing up an embarrassing moment as a hilarious anecdote. Come on down and say hi. Oh, look who finally decided to join us. Oh, this is the funniest thing. Did you know she still wet her bed until she was 6? 6! Story 13. I was raised with the motto, if you lose, you can't come home. My great-grandfather said it to my grandmother when she was being bullied by a boy. My grandmother said it to my mother when she ran in the house from a girl who was beating her up, kicked her out, and locked the door. If you lose, you can't come home. For me, there was no one incident. It was just a mantra, and now I am absolutely afraid of failure of any sort. I come to work early to prepare and stay late to make sure I've got it right. Same with my hobbies and every part of my life. I cannot be bad at anything. Free time only exists as practice, study, training time. The amount of pressure I put on myself is not healthy. I'm 38 years old, and I haven't spoken to my mother in 10 plus years. But I almost always win, and I'm amazing at the things that I do. Small consolation. Parents fuck us up, man. I felt this in my soul. All the time, people tell me, "You're so creative. You're so good at everything you do." Yeah, I know. Because I'm a people pleaser with anxiety and rejection issues, and if I don't excel at every single thing I do, I will literally just fall apart because my entire life is built around my pathological need for praise and acceptance. Thankfully, my mom was never the pushy type, but she was very much, "You didn't succeed? Well, that's your own fault. Better luck next time." Plus, her love language, and that of her parents, is acts of service rather than physical touch and affirmation. I understand her better now, but the lack of acknowledgement was pretty damaging at 10 years old. Story 14. Passing on food issues by commenting on their children's weight or what they eat, etc. Or commenting on their own weight and food habits. Always dieting and putting themselves down. I am so lucky my parents and family have a healthy relationship with food. And thus I do as well. I have adult friends who have all kinds of messed up food issues precisely because their parents messed them up, forcing kids to finish everything on their plate when they don't want to eat anymore. Kids need to learn to eat when they are hungry and stop when they are not. Even if they are not eating because they are acting out, it won't hurt them eating a little less at one meal. Food should never be forced. Story 15. Telling your kids they are so smart constantly when they are excelling in primary school, but then expecting the exact same grades and chastising them for being lazy once they hit middle school and the work actually becomes difficult. You're not pushing them to do better. All you've done is instill this idea that they've peaked early and that they are a failure and a disappointment for not being a genius. Because everything used to be so easy, and suddenly it's hard, and everyone is mad at them. Ask me how I know. Parents, reward honesty, hard work, and a good attitude. Don't attach your kids' worth to their grades and test scores. Also, the difficulty jump for things like math is absurd between primary and secondary school. So, expect some struggle. Not to mention, puberty is happening at that same time, and absolutely fucking with the kids' emotions. Story 16. Not letting them struggle. I don't mean parents should never help, but running in to fix every difficulty teaches kids to think they can't solve problems. Help them by asking questions, by encouraging them to explore solutions, not by clearing every obstacle in their path. And then, help them to reflect on the process. Praise them for their effort and their persistence. Let them learn to view mistakes and failures as part of the process. Let them own their successes and be proud that they worked hard. Story 17. Saving for their kids' college before their own retirement. This is a great way to turn your kids into your retirement plan. Put on your own oxygen mask before you help others. Having kids and not saving for their college is bad too. My husband and I won't be contributing a dime to our parents' care in old age because we're 40 and still paying off the student loans they talked us into. Through our 30s, we kept getting questions about when we were having kids, buying a house, etc., etc. Dude, we have barely been able to start saving for our own retirement because of our student loans. Kids are completely out of the question, and we only recently were able to afford a house that is significantly more humble than what our families expected us to purchase. Looking back, all of our parents were completely financially illiterate and coasted through the boom years of the late 20th century. Rather than sacrifice and save for our futures, they took every penny and spent it on themselves. We've spent the last 20 years picking up the pieces of their poor financial choices and how it affected us as teens and young adults. The only bright spot is that by the time we're old, our wise and frugal choices might mean a more comfortable old age than what our parents are now confronted with. Story 18. Not getting their kids professionally diagnosed because there's nothing wrong with them. My parents refused to believe anyone who suggested I should be tested for autism. My mom always used to tell me all about how she stood up to my teachers for me. She never told me specifically what it was about, other than, they said you needed to be put in special classes, but I told them no. Little did she know how much I struggled socially because I thought I was normal. If I had gotten the help I needed early on, I doubt I would have struggled as much as I did. Story 19. Not teaching them to do basic things for themselves, like making food, cleaning, or doing laundry. I had my kids making their own lunches and helping do their own laundry in kindergarten. I used to tell them that I wasn't being lazy making them do these things, that this is something they need to learn. I also took them to the grocery store with me to pick out what they wanted for lunch for the week, because that was also a good way to teach them about proper nutrition, but also giving them some control over what they had for lunch. Kids need a certain level of autonomy. Let them pick out their lunch snacks, pick out their clothes in the morning. I even got them alarm clocks and taught them how to set them up so they could get up for school. It gives them a sense of purpose and confidence doing these things and making these decisions. Most kids get woken up by their parents, told what to wear, made breakfast by their parents, sent to school where all day they are told what to do by their teachers. They eat what their parents pack them for lunch, eat what they're given for a snack, sent home to do homework, and their parents cook them dinner and get them ready for bed. That's a whole lot of no control over their lives, day after day. Story 20. When I was young, ages 3 through 5, I did a lot of modeling. My parents got me jobs doing photo shoots and commercials. When I got older and was looking at colleges, I discovered that I only had a few $100s in the savings account they had set up when I was little. All of my modeling income was supposed to be in that account, and I found out that my parents over the years had tapped into it and took almost all of it. I ended up going to community college to do my GE, so it wasn't really that big of a deal. I just ended up transferring to university later. But I did feel fairly betrayed and screwed out of money that I had earned. So I guess my answer would be stealing from their kids. Feeling like their children owe them for their existence is a really toxic and unfortunate trait that many parents have. Story 21. As a parent of young children, I've noticed a lot of baby talk from children that should be past it. I'm talking 5, 6, 7-year-olds still being allowed to use baby talk with no sign of being taught the correct way to pronounce and enunciate words. My daughter has friends in that age range, and they ask me for things, and I deliberately misunderstand them and then say, "Oh, you want fill in correct word here." I didn't understand what fill in baby talk here meant. I don't care if it pisses anyone off. Baby talk is not cute past 3. Teach your kids how to speak properly so they can confidently communicate. Story 22. Not being physically affectionate. I remember gingerly putting my arms around my parents when I was leaving for college. Minutes later, I realized that was the first time I had hugged them. Since then, I hug them every time I come home and every time before I leave. Now they've come to expect it and feel upset when I don't do it, but will still never initiate it. It's better now, but growing up in a household of severe childhood trauma with no warmth from your caregivers gave me some real issues. Story 23. Not vaccinating their kids. Let's push back all the normal arguments for a sec. Let's assume the kid ended up healthy-ish and is now in high school. You wouldn't have been able to play on any sports team in high school. You can't get into a 4-year college without all your vaccines. You can't get a food handler's permit without full vaccinations. No fast food. You can't work with kids at a daycare. You can't volunteer or work with the elderly. You can't get a job that requires a degree either. Your parents never wanted you to succeed. They faced scrutiny from friends, family, coworkers, and schools to ensure that you failed as an adult. Story 24. Hot take, but keeping them off technology, the internet. Obviously, this needs to be something that happens under strong supervision and in an environment of honest and open education. Obviously, the internet technology can be bad in all the ways they are bad, but when kids fall behind on technological digital literacy, they're screwed. The truth of the world we live in is that you need to at least know how to use and navigate these things. It's just most parents aren't willing to dedicate the time and effort it takes to equip their kids to do that in a safe and healthy way. They would rather just limit it entirely to have no limits on it. Story 25. I'm guilty of this, but becoming better. Not understanding what's important to them. Small things like stuffed animals are their only possessions, so it means the world to them when they are lost, damaged, taken away, etc. My son woke up in the middle of the night once and forgot his stuffed animal downstairs. I was too tired to go down and get it, and the next morning I realized my mistake. I tell my wife to imagine how it would feel if someone took your most prized possessions and threatened to take them away because you threw a tantrum or made a mistake. Story 26. Saying things like, "While you live in my house, you cannot do X," or "You have to do X while you live under my roof." This creates a feeling that the son is not welcome in the house he lives in, and he's merely a guest with limited rights. Parents say this crap and then keep wondering why their children left them to rot alone in their house. Also, "You cannot do X until you are 18 or 21 years old," or "not until you're 18." It implies that after 18, all rules are worthless, and the teen will be able to go wild and do whatever he wants. Parents create the 18-year-old rule, and then get shocked when teens go wild after 18. Also, it's harmful for teens who stayed in chains for years and now want to try everything at the same time.